Yeah, and I like to think of multisensory as building that connection between the brain and the body, because even if all you're doing is reading a visual chart to the beats of the metronome, we're still getting a big brain-body connection with our ocular motor skills, our attention, and then that ability to process the auditory information and the visual information simultaneously. So anytime you do a multisensory activity, you're really building a connection between the brain and the body. And we need that to help these kids and adults with dyslexia in order to help their brain process this information quicker, more efficient, more accurately.
I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica, and this is All Things Sensory by Harkla.
We are both certified occupational therapy assistants, and together with Harkla, we are on a mission to empower parents, therapists, and educators to help raise confident and strong children of all abilities.
On this podcast, we chat about all things sensory, diving into special needs, occupational therapy, parenting, self-care, overall health and wellness, and so much more.
We are here to provide raw, honest, and fun strategies, ideas, and information for parents, therapists, and educators, as well as other professionals to implement into daily life.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey there, welcome back to All Things Sensory by Harkla. We're so happy to have you here for another podcast. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Jessica. We're going to talk about multisensory processing and the connection to dyslexia today.
Yes. So this is a really interesting topic. It's something that we are growingly passionate about. It's something we've been passionate about this topic for a long time, but I just feel like we wanted to break down the connection specifically to using a metronome and rhythm and timing with that connection to dyslexia.
We do have another podcast, one podcast or more than one?
I think just one. It's an interview.
We have one podcast episode on dyslexia, kind of dispelling the myths around dyslexia, because so often we hear that dyslexia is when children reverse their letters, but it's actually so much more complex than that. And children with dyslexia don't always reverse their letters. There's so much more involved.
Yeah.
So we did interview Lori Benson Adams. Oh, I'm glad I got her name right. On dyslexia a couple years ago.
Yeah, she's great.
It's been a while. So we'll link that episode in the show notes so you can listen to that if you're interested in learning more about what dyslexia is and what you can do to help, because today we're going to focus specifically on multisensory processing, talk about some research, and then go from there.
Yeah, and kind of like what Jessica mentioned, we're not claiming to be experts in dyslexia, but it is something that we've worked with. We've had clients with dyslexia, and we've worked and incorporated these strategies and these activities that we're going to talk about today in with our clients as well.
I actually took a really good course from Kathy Johnson. From Kathy Johnson on dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, and the connection to primitive reflexes.
Yes.
So I'll see if I can find it. It's on PESI, but it was a really good
and Lori Benson Adams also has a lot of courses on dyslexia, dyscalculia, on sensational brain as well. And those are great courses too. So those are two experts, if you will, that we suggest doing further learning from if you are interested in learning more. If you're a practitioner, if you're a parent and you're interested in learning more about dyslexia, we're just going to give you the basics on dyslexia today, and then that connection with multisensory processing.
So dyslexia is really a brain-based learning disorder. It doesn't have an effect on intelligence. It really is the challenges associated with reading, writing, spelling, I can never say this word.
Phonological awareness.
Thank you. That one. Can never say it. And really, it's how the brain interprets all of this information when reading and writing, and it gets mixed up, it gets jumbled, it can have an effect on language development. Of course, it has an impact on school tasks, academic-related tasks, and you do need an official diagnosis to really say this child is dyslexic.
All right, and then multisensory learning specifically refers to incorporating multiple senses when you are learning like a new skill, such as reading or spelling spelling or writing. So you're using movement and you're using auditory cues and music and you're using different textured materials and manipulatives. So you're really bringing together multiple senses at once. So then when we're talking about multisensory processing and specifically incorporating the metronome, this is something that we have been doing for a long time and we absolutely love it. We turn on the metronome and we incorporate that rhythm and that beat with those skills that we're working on, such as spelling or writing or ball bouncing or, exercises, to really bring both sides of the brain together and in order to almost cement those learning concepts into the brain and the body even stronger.
Yeah, and I like to think of multisensory as building that connection between the brain and the body, because even if all you're doing is reading a visual chart to the beats of the metronome, we're still getting a big brain-body connection with our ocular motor skills, our attention, and then that ability to process the auditory information and the visual information simultaneously. So anytime you do a multisensory activity, you're really building a connection between the brain and the body. And we need that to help these kids and adults with dyslexia in order to help their brain process this information quicker, more efficient, more accurately.
So there was one specific research article that we looked at that kind of shows the connection between auditory processing, timing, sequencing, and dyslexia. And the article is called Rhythmic Processing in Children with Developmental Dyslexia, Auditory and Motor Rhythms Linked to Reading and Spelling. And so the article really goes into that connection of auditory processing in 10-year-old children, some who had a diagnosis of developmental dyslexia. And they reported links between paced motor tapping, auditory rhythmic processing, and written language development. And so with this article, it says that motor dexterity does not explain the relationship, but instead paced finger tapping explained unique variance in reading and spelling. So an interpretation based on the importance of rhythmic timing for both motor skills and language development. So just one article that talks about that timing and sequencing and the ability to improve reading, learning, writing, all of those important skills.
Yeah, there's a couple of other research articles that we found, and another one found that there's a relationship between auditory rhythm sensitivity and literacy in adults, which means it's also going to be applicable for children. We often see that. As well as showing an association with metronome inter-tap interval variability. Lots of words all connected here. But really what this specific research found was that there is that connection between dyslexia and the auditory rhythm challenges, which is what we like to do, is that metronome work to work on the auditory processing.
Exactly. So if you have a child who is diagnosed with dyslexia, or you have concerns about dyslexia, I would also be curious to look at your brain as the parent or the caregiver and see if that is something that you struggle with as well. If it is, then you should definitely be doing these activities that we're going to talk about and, we'll share more about in a little bit with your child, because likely it will improve both of your brains and it will make a big difference.
Yeah, so we have all the research articles that we found. We'll link them in the show notes, but let's talk about how multisensory activities actually help with dyslexia. And the first one is that multisensory activities strengthen neural pathways by engaging multiple senses. So when we're doing a movement task combined with an auditory task, we're strengthening the neural pathways that help us build that skill to do those two activities together simultaneously.
Exactly. It also improves phonemic awareness, decoding skills, and reading fluency. You think about when you're reading or when you're writing, there's a fluidity that has to occur. And by doing multisensory activities, by incorporating the metronome, you can improve that fluidity. It's likely going to be really challenging at first, especially if you're just clapping with the metronome. You'll see that maybe the child can't hear the beat of the metronome and clap simultaneously. And that is your sign that they're probably struggling with that fluidity and that fluency when they're reading and writing too.
And then also we're going to look at memory. So that's one of the pieces that's huge with dyslexia, is that working and visual memory. Multisensory activities are going to boost memory and retention through the hands-on learning. They're doing these full body, brain body connection activities, and it really is a hands-on learning activity, which we know from research on kinesthetic learning that it does improve all these areas.
So we actually have put together an entire program of our favorite multisensory activities we've used for years. There's new ones that we've come up with. There's just a variety of amazing activities. We've put these together into a program and a course. It's AOTA approved, and it's actually going to be launching soon, depending on when you're listening to this. It may already be out if you're listening to this later on, but it's a 10-week program, and you go through the specific activities week by week by week. We walk you through it all. It's outlined. There's a workbook that's included with all of the pictures, but I'll share one of my favorite activities if you want to share one of your favorite activities.
Okay, I have to think about this.
One of my favorites we call it squat letter taps. And we have a visual chart on the floor. You're standing over it, and you're squatting down and tapping a letter on the visual chart with the metronome. So each time you're squatting down, you're tapping it and you're saying what the item is, or you're tapping it with a specific hand that the visual chart is telling you to tap with. And so you're getting a lot of ocular motor work, a lot of convergence, divergence, and visual tracking, and obviously working on that timing and sequencing, and a lot of movement as well, a lot of vestibular input. So I feel like that is one of my favorites. I have a lot, but
I like all of them.
Oh, good.
They're all my favorite.
I'm glad.
No, one of my favorites is the bird dog, just because I love the bird dog exercise in general. It's one of my favorites to do with my clients. And so bird dog, you're on your hands and your knees, and you extend one arm and you extend the opposite leg at the same time, really getting both sides of the body working and creating those new neural pathways between both sides of the brain. And then we incorporate the metronome with this activity. So you're doing these movements in coordination with the metronome. So we're adding that multisensory piece to get the auditory processing. I think in one of the levels, we probably add a visual chart because we decided to make all these activities super hard for extra challenges. Yeah. But really, that activity is one of my favorites. Yeah. I think so. That was the first one that came to mind when I was thinking of them.
And most of the activities have level ups to make them more challenging, like we said, level downs, so you can start a little bit easier, and then just the regular activity as well. So those are just a few examples of the multisensory activities that we included in the program. Those are activities that you can try, you can test them out. And then if you need more guidance with that, then our program is available, or will be available depending on when you listen to this as well. We'll link that in the show notes for you to check out and learn, because that's honestly why we're here, is to be able to share that connection. And, there's we're not going to talk about this specifically, but the connection between primitive reflex integration and multisensory processing and dyslexia as well.
Well, because it's all connected.
It's all connected. Yeah. So a lot of the activities focus on that primitive reflex integration as well.
Now, some more activity ideas, some more multisensory activities that you can do with your child, with your clients. You can incorporate these into the classroom that specifically target dyslexia and the challenges. Wow, I can't talk today. I'm so sorry. The challenges associated with dyslexia. One of them is going to be tracing letters in a multisensory medium. So sand or salt tray, shaving cream. I also like using Play-Doh to roll out the letters and create the letters that way. But this is a really great hands-on kinesthetic way of practicing creating those letters to build that motor connection with the letter formation.
Yep. Another one is clapping or jumping with the beat of the metronome while you're working on spelling a word, or you're working on your spelling list and you have the child jump on the trampoline to spell their word, or they clap their hands with the metronome to spell the word, or they bounce and catch a ball with the metronome, or even without the metronome, just bouncing and catching while they're spelling the word in order to cement that new word that they're trying to spell and remember into their brain a little bit more.
Yeah, this is really great for spelling word practice. I've used this where we'll be doing an obstacle course with animals or colors or objects, and we have to spell the item while we're clapping or bouncing and catching the ball. And maybe the child doesn't know how to spell it. So first we write it on the whiteboard, and then they're also going to be visually tracking to spell the word while they're doing the motor coordination task at the same time.
And then also using movement to reinforce these learning activities. You know, crawling is obviously one of my favorites. I remember to say it this time. Crawling while you're spelling, crawling while you're doing math facts, crawling while you're holding something on your back. You can put visual charts up on either side of the wall, and you're crawling down the wall and you're reading something from the visual chart each time while you're turning your head. Turn on the metronome and make sure that you're crawling with the beat of the metronome. Change up the movement of your crawl, so you could go hand, hand, knee, knee, hand, hand, knee, knee, instead of that like opposite arm and leg simultaneously. Crawling is definitely going to benefit, and it's kind of a multi-sensory processing activity in and of itself, but then adding in that metronome or visual tracking activity can be really helpful too.
Yeah, and then one more, I was just thinking of this one I do in the clinic a lot with we call it the rainbow swing, but I don't actually know why, because it's not actually the rainbow colors.
Is it the Southpaw one?
But it's the Southpaw hammock swing that has the 4 colors and the 4 layers, and would all have, and obviously you can't do this at home if you don't have the swing or at school, but you can do this with other things as well. As the child is in the different colored layers of the swing, they have to tell me maybe a food item that is the same color. So if they're in the blue layer, they're going to tell me a food item that is also blue. And then we're going to talk about the letters that spell the color, that spell the food item they just came up with. And we're really going to start working on that working memory, that visualization, and the connection between the words, the letters, how to spell them. Maybe we would add on spelling them while we clap, writing them,
the letter sounds,
the sounds of the letters, and just have this full multi-sensory activity that's really targeting those challenges that the dyslexic child is having.
So really what this comes down to is understanding that connection between rhythm, timing, multisensory processing, and dyslexia, incorporating more multisensory processing activities into the day, into the classroom routine if you're a teacher. When you're introducing new concepts, you're introducing difficult concepts, using a multisensory approach to learning and really cementing these concepts into your daily routine. If you homeschool or if you're working on homework with your child, instead of just sitting at the desk, trying to pound those new concepts into their brain, get up, go outside, use chalk, use shaving cream, use salt, jump, crawl, move. Use some of these strategies to really make sure that you are giving their brain and their body a connection to learn the material and remember the material.
Yes, and make it fun.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We learn best when we have fun.
Yes.
So,
and if you're interested in our program that is launching soon, or it has launched, depending on when you're watching this or listening to it, we'll put a link in the show notes, but it is an amazing program. We originally created this like 6-7 years ago. It was a 30-day multisensory processing program. We've changed it. We've updated it. We've fully rebranded it. And I honestly love that it includes the workbook now, because that is just...
The workbooks are the best parts of our courses, honestly.
Yeah,
I think so.
Definitely. And for practitioners, you get the AOTA CEUs as well.
Yes. And then we will link all the research, all of the other podcast episodes we mentioned. Those are all linked in the show notes. You can find them. We love it when you take a screenshot that you're watching or listening and tag us on social media. We're All Things Sensory Podcast. If you do have concerns about your child's development, or if you are concerned about dyslexia or retained primitive reflexes, make sure that you reach out to your pediatrician, you get an OT eval, and you find a therapist who does specialize in these areas, and get them the help that they need, get them the resources, take our courses, listen to other episodes. Just know that we're here for you. And if you are listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever other podcast apps are out there, just know that we are on YouTube. So you can go to the All Things Sensory YouTube channel, subscribe, and you can actually watch us.
Yep. Oh boy.
Leave us a review, subscribe.
Yes.
All the things.
Okay. Thanks so much for being here. We'll plan on seeing you next week.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much for listening to All Things Sensory by Harkla.
If you want more information on anything mentioned in the show, head over to harkla.co/podcast to get the show notes.
If you have any follow-up questions, the best place to ask those is in the comments on the show notes or message us on our Instagram account, which is at harkla_family or at All Things Sensory Podcast. If you just search Harkla, you'll find us there.
Like we mentioned before, our podcast listeners get 10% off their first order at Harkla. Whether it's for one of our digital courses or one of our sensory swings, the discount code SENSORY will get you 10% off. That's SENSORY.
Head to harkla.co/sensory to use that discount code right now.
We are so excited to work together to help create confident kids all over the world. While we make every effort to share correct information, we're still learning.
We will double check all of our facts, but realize that medicine is a constantly changing science and art.
One doctor or therapist may have a different way of doing things from another.
We are simply presenting our views and opinions on how to address common sensory challenges, health-related difficulties, and what we have found to be beneficial that will be as evidence-based as possible.
By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice to treat any medical condition in either yourself or your child.
Consult your child's pediatrician or therapist for any medical issues that he or she may be having.
This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast.
Thanks so much for listening.